This episode contains discussion of murder by gunshot, drug use, talk of verbal and physical abuse, and paranormal activity. Listener discretion is advised.
You've no doubt heard the Amityville Horror before. From a best-selling book to a multi-million-dollar film franchise, the story has captured the world's attention from the instant it was reported. The quiet Long Island town was rocked when the DeFeo family was brutally murdered while they slept. The Lutz family purchased and moved into their home following their deaths, but only stayed for 28 days before fleeing in terror in the night. The sensationalism of their claims led to a media frenzy, but the question remains: did they experience a genuine supernatural phenomenon, or was it just an elaborate hoax?
All right, and this is part 2, so we've already done like the background of the house, the DeFeo family, we've covered those murders, and so now we're going to move into the next part. So if you haven't listened to part 1, go back, that's episode 323. Or start here if you like to start at the end and go back to the beginning. We're not your real mom, we never will be. You do what you want to do.
Be.
Exactly. And we do want to give a hey girl thanks again to Jennifer Lynn West and Charity for requesting this case.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to Mark for writing her on up.
Thank you. Okay, and just to kind of recap, the DeFeo family moved to Amityville from Brooklyn and into a beautiful house on Ocean Avenue, not the yellow card Ocean Avenue, as we have determined. The family's problems boiled over when father/husband Ronald Sr. was abusive to his wife and children. Butch, the eldest son, grew up using drugs, including heroin, LSD, and speed. After setting up a fake robbery to steal money from the family's car dealership, Butch murdered his mother, father, brothers, and sisters in cold blood as they slept.
Ooh.
So, yeah, that's a doozy. That's a doozy. All right, so let's get to Butch's trial. Butch's trial began on October 14th, 1975, just under a year from when he murdered his family. That's quick for a murder trial, I would think.
But, I mean, he confessed.
That's true. And there were literally no other
options.
Like, yeah.
Suspects.
Wow. Okay. The Suffolk County Assistant DA Gerard Sullivan had as much evidence as you could possibly want in a case like this. He had a confession from Butch. He had the murder weapon, which was owned by Butch and was positively identified as the murder weapon by forensics. He had Butch himself taking investigators to the exact spot where the evidence was found. That's a big one.
The only thing he didn't have, I feel like, was, video of
him
act.
Doing it. Yeah, exactly. Despite having all of this, Sullivan took zero chances when he approached this case. He interviewed and spoke with Butch leading up to the trial, questioning him. He studied Butch and how he talked to people. Butch had hired a very well-known defense attorney, and Sullivan suspected that they were going to try for an insanity defense, given Butch's erratic behavior the day of the murders. Sullivan felt that the jury seeing Butch as a sane, methodical killer was not something he could take for granted, and Butch's mental state would become a focal point of the trial. So Sullivan called witnesses from Butch's life. He wanted to paint a picture of a man who was a cold-blooded killer. He called friends, family, police officers, and detectives who worked on the case. But perhaps the witness that helped him the most was Butch. You got that right. He took the stand. And on the stand, Butch was shown pictures of his mother and father's bodies lying where they were slain. And when asked if that was his mother, Butch said, "No, I've never seen that person before in my life." And when asked if he'd killed his father, he said, quote, "Did I kill him? I killed them all. Yes, sir, I killed them all in self-defense." Self-defense, okay. How'd you kill your younger siblings in self-defense? Just wondering.
And how did you kill him while they slept in self-defense?
Yeah, that's a good question. Sullivan continued the questioning, asking Butch why he would do such a thing. And Butch said, quote, "As far as I'm concerned, if I didn't kill my family, they were going to kill me. And as far as I'm concerned, what I did was self-defense and there was nothing wrong with it. When I got a gun in my hand, there's no doubt in my mind who I am. I am God."
I think that's bad.
That's bad. What do you think his defense attorney was thinking when he said this stuff? Yeah. Like, if the man had hair, he would have been pulling it out. Like,
yeah.
Butch went on to testify that he heard voices who told him to do what he did. But that doesn't even mesh with the self-defense. They were going to kill me if I didn't kill them, but voices also told me to kill them.
Well, unless the voices told him that they're going to kill you unless you kill them, kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess. Okay, maybe that's it. The prosecution and defense both had their own experts in mental health, one arguing that Butch was not criminally responsible for the murders due to his mental state, the other arguing he knew exactly what he was doing. I mean, dueling experts, what are you supposed to do with that as a jury? While he was in custody leading up to the trial, Butch acted erratically in jail. He would speak nonsense. And there were basically two schools of thought. One, he was actually insane, or two, he was just trying to make everybody think he was insane. The defense called their medical expert Dr. Daniel Schwartz. Schwartz was well known and respected in his field. He would go on to get national notoriety in the Son of Sam case as a psychiatrist who found David Berkowitz to be criminally insane. Butch's own lawyer asked a few questions to lay out a basic understanding of what the jury should consider when making a ruling on sanity in the case. And then he asked kind of an open-ended question that allowed Schwartz to go into a detailed speech of sorts about Butch and different forms of psychosis, dissociation, and criminal insanity. And Sullivan was surprised but excited with how Butch's lawyer questioned Schwartz because he felt like he barely even touched on the actual case at all. Like, it was all very, like, concepts and overarching.
Focused on the insanity versus...
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what that means and like not really relating it back to the case. So when it was time for cross-examination, he didn't hold back. He started out questioning Schwartz about his credibility as an expert witness in this case. He pointed out that he had spoken with Butch for only a few hours, and Sullivan himself had questioned Butch much longer than Schwartz did. As they continued, Sullivan picked apart the, quote, lecture that Schwartz had given, pointing out any and every little thing he could do or could to discredit him, which culminated in why Butch took the shell casings from the crime scene. Schwartz said Butch took them because he didn't like the police and didn't want to help them by leaving the evidence. And Sullivan basically wanted to point out that, first of all, so we all agree that Butch took the shell casings. Nobody is saying that he didn't.
Right.
You've just agreed that he did, and this is why he did it. But he did it. And so Sullivan said, no, he took them because he knew it was what he did was wrong, and he didn't want to get caught. Like, trying to cover things up in these cases is evidence that you knew right from wrong when it happened. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And the big one that comes to mind for me is Andrea Yates. She did not know what she was doing was wrong.
No.
And there was no shame in her game. She down to the end thought that she was doing her children a favor.
Yep. Yeah. She didn't try to hide anything. She didn't. Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Exactly.
And Marjorie Dial?
Mm.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. She is another example of someone who puts on a show to try to be like, look how insane I am.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah, because when you mentioned her, I'm like, I don't think she was... I think she knew what she was doing, but okay.
No.
Well, and actually, I saw an interview with Butch where he was talking about somebody who was an expert in paranormal stuff that was there at the trial. And he said when he saw me, he didn't say when he saw me testify, but that's what he's talking about when he was on the stand. But the way he worded it was when he saw my performance, he said, that man must be possessed by a devil. And he referred to it as his performance at least 2 or 3 times in like a 3-sentence time span. Like he only called it a performance, which I thought was interesting.
Yep.
So the prosecution had their own expert witness testify, and Sullivan had worked out a series of questions for him to answer that told the story of why Butch was not, quote, insane. He asked questions that allowed the jury insight as to why he made the conclusions that he did regarding Butch. They dissected Butch and his interactions he had with them, and when it came time for him to be cross-examined, he held fast. He did not get rattled under the scrutiny, unlike Schwartz did for the defense. Sullivan felt like he presented the best case that he could, but there were still, there's always that chance. You never know what the jury is going to do. I mean, Casey Anthony. After initial deliberations, the jury came back with a 10-2 vote. The two were unsure of Butch's mental state at the time of the murders. Further deliberations ensued, and on November 21st, 1979, Butch was found guilty of 6 counts.
Wasn't 1979, it was 1975.
Did I say 1979?
Yes, you did.
Wow. No. 1975. You're correct. Butch was found guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder. 2 weeks later, he was given 25 years to life in prison. Now, during his incarceration over the years, you're not going to believe this, but Butch has changed his story quite a few times. At one time, he claimed that his sister Dawn killed his father. Then his mom killed all his siblings in a fit of rage before he finally killed her himself.
Oh my gosh.
Dawn killed the father, and then the mom killed the siblings.
And then you killed her.
Why?
It's like that meme or gif of like the
all
of the equations and stuff, and you're trying to figure it out. Yeah,
like
carry the 2 and add a 7.
It doesn't make sense. He also would claim at some point that he, Dawn, and 2 friends committed the murders, quote, out of desperation because his parents were plotting to kill him. There are several stories that he comes up with that include the sister who was murdered.
What a piece of shit.
It just doesn't feel like, but there are people who, like, I watched this documentary on it, and there are people who believe that and say, this one journalist guy was like, yeah, I had a DEA agent or somebody contact me after the trial and said that he was actually that the house was under surveillance at the time that the murders occurred. So
why? Go ahead.
Right. So he didn't see the whole thing happened. Yeah, but he would have been outside when it happened. And he says that he saw Dawn come out holding the rifle. She had a hooded coat on, holding the rifle. She went down to the boat area, rode off wherever the stuff was dropped. And then she came back in, and then he killed her.
Get out of here. I mean, I have definitely heard the theory that there was more than one killer because everybody claims, or not everybody, but there are people who claim that he could not have killed everyone in the house and no one heard it and didn't wake up and that kind of thing. But I don't buy any of it. I think he did it all himself.
Right. Yeah. Also, we have talked about this before. I mean, and from everybody, I don't know guns very well, but everybody who talks about this type of shotgun or rifle, it's loud. It's super loud. Like they said that you could hear one of those blasts 3 to 4 blocks away, but none of the neighbors heard anything. They didn't hear the gunshots anyway. That it's supposed to be super, super, super loud. But if you think about it, if he kills mom and dad first, which is going to be the way you would do it, because if dad wakes up and hears the gunshots, he's
gonna take you out.
Yeah. Exactly. And he's your strongest adversary at that point. Like, you don't want to have to fight him. So you shoot dad first. Mom wakes up. You shoot her. They're both still in bed. But the rest of the people in the house are kids. Mm-hmm. And kids sleep through everything. They sleep through
a tornado.
Exactly. There was a tornado. It sounded like a freight train inside our house. The whole house was shaking. And Tori had no idea it happened.
Really didn't. To this day, I don't remember any of it.
Yeah. And the storm leading up to that was bad. It was a really, really, really loud, scary storm. And then the tornado happened and Tori was just asleep. Like,
it was the best sleep I've ever had.
Apparently. Like, yeah. But kids do. They sleep through stuff. So I don't think it's a really loud noise, so, like, yeah, I guess it's unusual, but my kids have slept through some pretty bonkers ass shit, you know? Like, something will happen and we'll be like, yeah, did you guys hear that? And they're like, no. Like, Andrew got that stomach bug when we were in a hotel room, the 4 of us together. He was vomiting so loudly, and he was up and down, up and down, up and down. And it was really bad. I didn't get any sleep. They didn't wake up one time, and we were all in the same room together. Like, I don't know.
I agree. I mean, definitely. And we'll talk about a theory of why none of the neighbors heard anything as well. So,
yes. Experts noted that given how often Butch changed his story over the years, anything he said regarding to the night of the murders should be approached with extreme caution. Again, he's changed his story about 11 times, right? So we may never know exactly what happened that night, but the most widely accepted version of events is this. The Friday before the murders was the day that Ronald Sr. confronted Butch at the dealership, which resulted in Butch speeding away after telling his father that he was going to kill him. In the early morning hours of the day that the murders took place, bitch. Oh my God.
Can we call him that from now on? Like, that's perfect.
It just came out. Butch went,
Bitch.
and I said, bitch.
Bitch.
Oh my God, bitch.
Get out of here.
Whoopsie-doodles. So sorry. Butch went to the hidden storage area in his room where he kept all of his guns. He chose the .35 caliber Marlin rifle. He fires a shot into his father's back, which ripped through one of his kidneys and out his chest. And then he fired again, which severed Ronald Sr.'s spine before coming lodged in his neck. That's horrific. Louise began to wake up, but Butch quickly fired 2 shots, which shattered her ribs and caused her right lung to collapse. I hope that she died immediately after that. Like, that just sounds horrific.
Terrible.
Like, I hope that she did not lay there
Suffering.
for a long time. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Then he moves on to his brother's room. He stood between their beds before firing a shot into each one, killing them. And then he goes to his sister's room. Allison began to stir just as Butch pointed the rifle to her face and pulled the trigger. He then did the same to Dawn. So in the span of 15 minutes, I would say less than that even.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a boom, 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 but like,
Yeah.
I mean, he has to walk, but all the bedrooms are, it's not like he has to go to
close.
different houses to do it. Yeah. So yeah, that's pretty quick. But everybody in his family was murdered in cold blood. He had taken the family dog Shaggy out to the boathouse and tied him up. He then showered, trimmed his beard, and put on his work clothes. Because remember, he's such a star employee, he's got to work early that day. He gathered up all the evidence and set out to the suburbs of Brooklyn. He'd put everything in a pillowcase. He threw it into a storm drain. He then returned to Long Island and showed up to his grandfather's Buick dealership around 6 a.m. You gotta think those people were like, the fuck is Butch doing here?
Right. I'm sure they were
That's
like,
weird.
oh, man, Butch is here.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Once the scene was swarming with people, a reporter asked a couple of neighborhood kids if they knew anything, and they said they had heard the dog barking, but no gunshots. And this is one of the biggest mysteries in the tragedy. Like we said, that Marlin rifle is not a quiet gun, and it's just kind of crazy to think that nobody heard at least one of the 8 shots. And it's early morning between 2 and 4 a.m., right? Or why the rest of the family didn't wake up. But there are 2 popular theories. One is that the night before, when the family ate, Butch had drugged their food to make them all essentially pass out and stay asleep once they did, except there were no traces of drugs found in their system. So, nope.
Right.
Didn't happen. It's also weird that they were all face down.
Yeah.
That part is super weird to me. That almost feels like he told them to lay face down.
Maybe.
I mean, I don't know, because that's 6 people. You would assume everybody sleeps slightly differently, you know,
Right.
or like maybe sometimes you sleep on your stomach, sometimes you don't, some are on their side, some are, you know, like it's odd that all 6 would be face down.
Right. That is strange.
At all times, you know? Yeah. And when it comes to none of the neighbors hearing the gunshots, some theorize that it's possible that the neighbors did actually hear the gunshots. But because of Ronald Sr. and Louise's dad's connection to the mafia, that they maybe were like too afraid to tell police that they'd heard anything. Maybe at the time that it happened, they thought that Ronald Sr. was doing something and then they didn't want to report it and then it come back on them.
And that, to me, is super understandable if that's the case, because, I mean, if it's something that you know but you don't talk about, you know what I mean? Like, everybody knows that they have mafia connections, but you're not going to be like, hey, man, how's the mafia? Like,
yeah.
you probably don't want to...
Yeah, you don't want to draw attention to it or piss somebody off. Or,
yeah, or like if you hear or see something, you're like, I didn't see nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Snitches get stitches. I mean, but once Butch was arrested for it and it was determined that he acted alone, still nobody came forward, which I kind of thought was interesting.
It is,
but
yeah.
Maybe at that point they were like, it doesn't matter. I don't know.
I don't
know. And those are just two of the most popular theories. There's tons and tons of others. Butch died at 69 years old in March of 2021 in the Albany Medical Center. Actually, I think it's Albany.
It is.
I don't know why I said Albany.
Do you call almonds? I
don't say salmon.
Yeah, what is wrong with you?
I don't know what happened there. Albany Medical Center in Albany, New York, which is where I flew in for Mark and Michelle's wedding, and their little baby Landon was born there.
Ow.
And that's when I learned that northern people can also be hillbillies. I didn't know that.
Well, it is something that you don't hear about every day. But Torella, do you want to go ahead and take the history of the Lutzes because you can't do the last part of it?
Sure, I'll take this part because this part doesn't feel so scary to me.
Yeah, she's too scared of the ending of this, so...
It's so scary. Okay. George and Kathy Lutz met at a diner that Kathy waitressed at. She was a single mom who had 3 children, Danny, Christopher, and Melissa. And when Kathy worked, George would always come into the diner and make sure to sit in her section. He was very fond of her from literally the moment he laid eyes on her. One evening, Kathy is leaving for the night, and her car wouldn't start. And she starts to walk home, but George pulls up on his Harley and offers her a ride home. And from that moment on, they were together. Christopher recalls that his mom was super excited, and it was a really exciting time for the family all around. George's grandfather had started a surveying company, and at this point, George was running that business, so this afforded him some free time. He used that free time to ride his Harley and hang out with like-minded individuals. Christopher said the first time he met George, he shows up on his Harley trike, and he's like, oh my gosh, this is the coolest thing ever, and George gives him and the other kids each a ride on it, and they all thought it was amazing and it was such a blast. And they just said that it was really fun to be around George, to be around his friends that he rode with. It was like they'd instantly been brought in to be a part of this big family. And George had a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and he got the children involved in classes as well. And Christopher said it was just nice to have a father figure, and he was really kind to them all. Basically, he says that, if mom liked him, that was that, that was good enough for us. We liked him too. George and Kathy married, and by all accounts, George was a great father to all the children. And they were just that, all American family starting a life together. So in December of 1975, the family moved into a home that they felt very lucky to have been able to buy. It was a 3-story home on Ocean Avenue with a boathouse right on the water. It had been vacant for over a year, and George and Kathy knew its history. In fact, Butch had been found guilty and sentenced just weeks before the Lutz family got the house. This is weird to me. Before deciding to try to buy the house, George and Kathy sit down with the kids, and I don't know exactly how old they were at this time, but
young though.
Fairly young. And they talked about moving in and told kids.
Hang on. I thought that it was 5, 7, and 9. Was that when George came into the family though? And then a couple years later I don't know. But I know that it was 5, 7, and 9 at some point. Those are significant ages for a significant time.
Yeah. So they sit down and they talk to the kids and they say, hey guys, we want to buy this house, but the whole family was murdered there. Are you cool with sleeping in the same rooms that all these kids were killed in?
I know for sure that if our parents had that conversation with us, I'd be like, yeah, okay. And you'd be like, no.
Absolutely not. Emancipated now. I'm gone. I don't know. As a parent myself, I don't know. First of all, we would never buy a house like this. Andrew is scared to death of ghosts, even worse than I am. So he won't even, if for some reason we needed to house it for you guys, he wouldn't stay there. It's too old. He thinks there's ghosts there. So he wouldn't do it. So, but say we were you know what, not a big deal, whatever. Whole family murdered there, whatever. I just don't think I could look at my kids and be like, okay, guys, so like everybody got murdered here. The brother killed them all. Mom, dad, everybody, all the little kids, all of that. So the room that you're going to sleep in, by the way, we're going to try to get as much of the furniture that we can that was left here that all still has blood on it. But you're just going to sleep in the same beds that the kids were killed in. You cool with that? Are you okay? Like, I just can't imagine having that conversation with my kids. I think I would just pass on it.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know, if they're little enough, maybe don't tell them. I don't know. It just seems weird to me.
Yeah, I agree.
The whole thing. And the kids apparently were like, sure, that's fine. I don't know. So it was being sold for $100,000, but they made an offer for $80,000, and the offer was accepted. They probably could have offered fucking $10,000 and got it. I mean, at this point, geez, because literally nobody else wanted to buy this house at this point.
Right.
And then for that, for an extra $400, they got most of the furniture that was left in the house from when the DeFeos lived there.
Now, listen, I do agree with the blood and like if you were going to sleep in the same bed that they slept in, if like mattress and all that kind of stuff. But if you are so naive to think that you don't have something in your house that belonged to a dead person, you are so stupid. It's not even funny. The buffet in your kitchen, your dining room.
That person's dead now, but they didn't get brutally murdered next to it.
I'm just saying, dead's dead.
I mean, dead is dead, yeah.
No offense, but it is. Like,
yeah. Christopher remembered the family just being excited. It was a huge change for them to be living in this massive, like 3-story house, right? Some people questioned how they could have really afforded to buy the house. They were originally looking for something in the $30,000 to $50,000 range, and they ended up buying a house for $80,000. But Kathy had sold her house, so she had some money. George had sold his father's house. They had a good down payment, and George had a plan to move the surveying business into the basement of that house, so then they wouldn't have to rent another office somewhere, and they were going to move his boats into the boathouse, and then that would save money on marina storage fees. So with all of those changes, they felt like they could swing the mortgage.
Yes. Now, I'm going to take over because Torella is scared. So.
Too scared.
When it comes to what happened after the family moved in, it is widely accepted that what they say happened is in many instances either an outright lie or fabrication that is based on a less exaggerated fact. So we're going to go into what they say and talk about it. But we're going to go into all the lawsuits. I mean, there's so many things in this case that we could go into, but we would be here for 22 days, you know. Mm-hmm. So when George and Kathy had initially gone to look at the house, George noticed that in some areas there was still small amounts of blood on the floors or on some of the furniture. And we're not talking about like puddles of blood or anything. It's just enough that if you were looking at it, you would know what it was. And knowing the history of the house.
That's a no for me, dog. Like,
I know. Yeah. I mean, I think that you would have to, well, you and I would draw the line somewhere along the way, but I'm just saying like, I don't think I'd want to sleep in the bed that somebody had been murdered in for sure. But I mean, I am not of the belief that an object is going to become possessed or something. It's maybe a little morbid if you think about it, but I am into antiques and I'm just not, it doesn't really bother me that bad because if you like antiques, somebody has died that had owned it. So that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I think it's just like it's so soon after it happened. It's like that kid was shot in that bed a couple years ago.
Right.
The blood is still on it.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, I can understand exactly what you're saying. I think that if I was in this instance, I don't think that maybe I would pass on the house necessarily, but I would pass on the belongings.
Yeah.
I don't know. But since they knew about the history, George and Kathy had asked a priest to come in and bless the house before they officially moved in. And the priest came in. He goes room to room doing his thing. Then he goes into the sewing room and said that it was strikingly colder than anywhere else in the house. And he would later say that it was winter, so it wasn't completely out of the ordinary for a room to become colder when it wasn't in use. But it was noticeably colder. And that's one of the things about ghosts and things like that. They say that the temperature goes down significantly when another otherworldly presence is around. Then he said as he was spreading holy water and asking a blessing, the priest claims to have heard a deep, sinister voice say, "Get out!" And he felt like it was directed directly at him.
Right at him.
Yeah.
Dude, it's like pouring down rain right now.
Oh my gosh. That's also another sign of ghosts.
Tori, don't scare me. I'll have to move.
The family claims that the same room had an inexplicable infestation of flies that would come and go. And if you've seen the movie, which Torella has seen the movie, I have seen both versions. I prefer the Ryan Reynolds one for obvious reasons, but in it, the priest gets like attacked by flies. It wasn't like they carried him out or anything, but like they just swarmed him like a plague kind of, and he ran away from it. And the Lutzes did say that that was Hollywood taking their liberties. But, you know, it's just an odd thing, especially during a Long Island winter, for flies to be around. But back when the DeFeo murders were being investigated, some police officers noted that there were flies in the room too, and that was also during winter. So whatever was going on in that room happened to be going on long before the Lutz family moved in.
Yeah.
The family noticed that the rest of the home became cold after they moved in too. There could be a roaring fire in the fireplace, but it was still cold. And they claimed that they found gelatinous drops of goo around places. Ugh. Like, hey, your house is oozing.
Yeah.
In some versions of this tale, the goo was green, and others it was black or red, and it would appear on the walls, slowly dripping down or on the carpets. I mean, that's just it's gonna stain, wouldn't it?
Wouldn't you think, though, that they would have taken pictures of this?
100% they would have taken pictures. And also, the fact that it's like, it could have been green, or maybe black, or maybe red. Like, I understand that the telephone game happens with, like, stories, but if it's a fact, there's got to be somewhere where it's, like, consistently always green, or whatever. Yeah. George claimed that one night he and Kathy were sleeping in their bed. This is one of my favorite of the hoaxes. They were sleeping in their bed when he looked at her, and she suddenly aged right in front of his face. Her face wrinkled and her hair grayed, but there was another time that Kathy just started levitating, apparently. And from the moment they moved in, the family says that they heard bumps in the night, which is not uncommon. Like, a house settles, you hear things sometimes. I mean, that's not crazy, but they were saying there were constantly sounds of cabinets or drawers in the kitchen opening and slamming shut. There were doors opening and slamming shut constantly, and at one point the Lutz family claimed that the doors were slammed with such force that the hardware on the doors, like the handles and the hinges, completely blew right off and were destroyed, and they had to be replaced with new pieces. The Cromartie family, who later purchased the house, refuted these claims, saying that, from what they could tell, all of the hardware on the doors was original and had not been replaced or tampered with.
I mean, that's something that, like, I don't know, because you'd think if they had to replace pieces, they may not have been able to get the exact pieces that match everything, so some of them might be different, but the Cromartie family says no, everything looks to be original, looks to be exactly the same, so... Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not buying what they're selling. Yeah.
Also, there was one woman that I saw in the thing who said that Kathy ended up dying of some disease, respiratory illness that made her age significantly before she died. So, like, she looked like she had aged like 30 years when she died. And they were like, see, remember? And then she aged.
I mean,
she
so there's
aged at the thing. It was like a premonition or something.
Oh, that's not what. Okay. I wasn't going with that. I was like, see, there's always an explanation.
Oh yeah, well they're saying like it's exactly like what happened. They said there was a story too where and this is like that telephone thing, because here we've heard George said she aged in front of his face, but the way I heard that story, or there's a second story, which is possible, is that she was like washing her hands or her face or something. She looks in the mirror in the bathroom and her reflection has aged.
I mean, yeah, I watched some, I guess you would call it testimonial, or, you know, he was being interviewed, George and Kathy, and George said he saw it, but I don't know. I wouldn't put it past him to have said both things. I don't know.
Yeah.
But on a different occasion, the family claimed that one of their sons was near a window that was open, and he looked out with his hand on the windowsill. And suddenly, the window slammed shut, and they were unable to raise it because of the force being applied to it. So they're saying like an otherworldly presence was holding pushed the window down. And the thing is, the windows in the house were set up on a weight counterweight system, so you should be able to open and close them easily with minimal effort. But what was discovered was this particular window, the counterweights were improperly adjusted. And an investigator discovered that you could make the window move up and down by stepping on a certain spot on the floor near it. So.
Also,
yeah.
George said that when this happened to whichever child it was, that he took him to the hospital because it was severely injured. So he took him to the hospital to get it treated. And so one of the people looking into it that was like refuting their claims and stuff publicly said, okay, well, tell me what hospital and I'll go get the record. That's an easy thing to prove that it did happen, right? And he's like, well, when I said like took him to the hospital, we just like bandaged it at home, really. So you're not going to find that record. Like,
see, like, and I don't think that like, I'm not having to convince you. I'm definitely like, hello, this is so obviously a hoax. But
does it change how scared I am? No. I'm still scared that once we finish this, I'm going to have all of this in my brain and then I have to walk through my house by myself to get out of here.
And I will say, these things like this happening are great for horror movies because that shit does scare you. Like a jump scare or something like that. That's it's good for a horror movie. So for them passing it off as fact, that doesn't fly with me because I'm like, no, I don't even kind of think so. But for the purpose of it being in a horror movie, I'm here for it. So it's fine. But the Lutz's family claims that all this happened in the span of 28 days. And as we mentioned, when George met Kathy and the kids, he treated them like they were his own and he loved them. And in fact, shortly after they got married, he insisted on legally adopting them as his own. And the family said that as they stayed longer and longer in the house, his entire demeanor changed. He himself said that he could feel it, and it was like he had a quiet rage brewing inside of him. He was short-tempered. He reacted to things with rage, which was something that he never did before he moved into the house. And George said that from the time that they moved in, he couldn't sleep. He said he would wake up around 3:15 a.m. pretty much every night, which is the time that it is theorized that the DeFeo family died. That, to me, is a little too convenient. Every night you woke up at 3:15, and that just so happens to be when the DeFeos were murdered. Like,
yeah. And that would have been publicized, like, yeah.
And there was also a claim that the Lutz's daughter had an imaginary friend named Jody that she spoke with. And in the movie, the Ryan Reynolds one, I just watched it, Jody was the little girl that had lived there previously. So it would have been like the youngest little girl. But in some accounts, Jody was a pig with glowing red eyes. And Jody, the pig, would look into her bedroom at night through the window. So actually, the neighbor had a cat who was big and very fat, think Garfield-esque, that Ronald DeFeo affectionately called the pig because of how fat it was. So the thought is that when the Lutzes were probably fabricating some of the story that they had heard variations of this cat story, they like rolled it into their own version of it, you know. On another occasion, the Lutz family claimed that they saw hoof prints in the snow leading from their house down to the water. And again, this would be great for a movie, but records show that there wasn't even snow that day. So unless that's part of it where it only snowed at their house.
Okay, well, there you go.
I mean,
demon snow.
Yeah, it could happen. That is a movie that should be on the Sci-Fi Channel. Yes,
for sure.
Demonic snow angels. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
After all of these crazy happenings, the family finally got fed up and fled the house, leaving everything they owned, that is a weird con to leave everything that you own in this house.
It is.
That is bizarre.
Yeah. It's really weird. Okay. So, unfortunately, we may never know what actually happened. Both George and Kathy have since passed away, and they were steadfast in interviews and everything up until their deaths. Christopher has an interesting theory regarding their brief time in the Amityville house, though. So his room was the one that belonged to Butch, and he said that when they first moved in, he noticed that inside his closet there was a hook on the wall. He had a bag with a drawstring on it, and when he hung it up on the hook, the paneling pulled away from the wall, and there was that hiding place that Butch would hide his stuff. So Christopher says he went into that hidden part one day after they'd moved in, and he finds 2 bags of pills. And he said at the time he didn't know what they were, but later in life he asked George about them, and George said that they had been Quaaludes. And Christopher says he's never taken Quaaludes. He doesn't know what kind of effect they have on you when you take them, but he does know that George had a very evident change in his demeanor when they moved in. He stopped going into work. His hygiene suffered. He wasn't taking care of himself. He wasn't showering. He wasn't brushing his hair, like all of that kind of stuff. He became obsessed with sitting by the fire or going to work on his boats in his boathouse. And now as an adult, Christopher thinks that George was maybe taking the pills during the time that they were in the house. And at that point, he was like in the midst of a drug binge. Christopher says that after they fled, George became obsessed with their story and kind of more central to the point, the money they could make from this story. And George did not see anything wrong with adding a little fiction to the story. So this is very interesting. At some point, the Lutzes got hooked up with William Weber. That name isn't familiar, but you actually do know who he is. Weber was Butch DeFeo's defense attorney. And so after Butch went to prison, Weber was working on writing a book about everything. He'd gotten some offers about movie deals, book deals, all that kind of stuff. So he had hired a writer to help. He had other people on board. And then he was contacted by George and Kathy. Now, why would they want to talk to the defense attorney? Right. Of the person who murdered everybody in the house that they live in now. Like, that seems weird. But they were asking Weber to put them in touch with Butch. They wanted to talk to Butch and see if he was affected by anything similar to what they had experienced. And Weber was like, oh yeah, we should definitely get you in touch with Butch. But by the way, I'm writing a book and your experience would be a great like epilogue if you come join me. So he basically told them they could put together a great story between the mass murder that took place and then their claims of paranormal activity. Weber was really pushy, though. He ended up sending a contract to them. They didn't like the terms, and so they were like, nah. But Weber says that they met in person one time, and he tape recorded the whole thing. And he said that they took facts of the case and then kind of spun them into the paranormal stuff. Like that the officers noted that there were flies in Dawn's room. But her body was there for a long time too. So I don't know. So then they took that as, okay, well, that'll be the room where all the flies are. And we'll do this and we'll do that. Like he says it's all tape recorded. I don't know. So they stopped talking to Weber, but they liked the idea of writing a book. So they started speaking with Jay Anson, and then the rest is history, right? The book became a massive success, which spun off feature films. To date, there have been 35 plus different movies somehow associated with Amityville. George said that the events as told in the book are, quote, mostly true. And he and Kathy both took polygraph tests to prove that, for what it's worth. The Ocean Ave house was investigated by Stephen Kaplan, a vampirologist and ghost hunter.
Vampirologist?
He and George had a falling out, though, when Kaplan said if he found any fraud, he would expose it. The way that his wife talked about it, I think he's passed now, but the way that his wife had talked about it was, you know, she was like, we told everybody that we worked with, if we find evidence to support your claims, we'll tell the public that. If we find evidence that goes against it, we'll tell the public that, whatever. This apparently pissed George off. He later wrote a book called The Amityville Horror Conspiracy, in which, you guessed it, he claims it's a fraud. And he is the one, it was Kaplan that said he wanted the medical records and George wouldn't give it to him, and then was like, actually, never mind. There are claims that the house was built on a Native American burial ground, but the Amityville Historical Society says no, that's not true. Ed and Lorraine Warren were called in to investigate the house as well. And the Warrens are considered royalty in the ghost hunting / supernatural circles. You can draw your own conclusions about the validity of what they do, but they do have a following. They've been featured in several films as characters, from the Amityville movies to The Conjuring. All of those movies.
Gosh, The Conjuring 1 and 2, my favorite. The Nun should have been great. I didn't love it. But the character Valak is just my freaking favorite. I don't mind Annabelle. Some of the Annabelle movies, it's just like, yes, it's so good. The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. No, thank you.
No, thank you. Okay. I haven't watched any of these. You won't be surprised. They're too scary. Like, absolutely not. In 1952, the Warrens founded the New England Society for Psychic Research, the oldest ghost hunting group in New England. They investigated the house with others and took a series of time-lapse infrared photos. They were joined by Hans Holzer, another famed investigator in these circles. Of all the photos taken, there was one that stood out. It pictured a young man with glowing eyes, and he kind of seems to be peeking out of a room by the staircase. Don't say me that. I don't like that. Like, I was watching this documentary, and I was like, hell no, and I'm like skipping ahead. I'm like, don't show me that. I don't like seeing that. So everybody was like, obviously this is a ghost. It's a ghost. It's a ghost. It's a ghost. Another person that was there was Paul Bartz, another paranormal investigator.
How funny that his name is Paul Bartz and it's like Paul Blart.
I know. I almost said Paul Blart and I was like, wait, bless you.
Thank you.
So he was there, and there are other pictures of the event or, time that they were there. And so there are pictures showing what Paul Bartz looked like. And the ghost happens to be wearing the same shirt as him, and they look a lot alike. I don't know. Also, though, and like, when there was a journalist that was there, she worked for like the local news or whatever. Mm-hmm. She says there were no children in that house. So who could it have been? Because there were no children there. But other people say that this Paul Blart guy brought his nephew along that night so he could see what they were doing. So there was a child in the house.
Right.
So people are saying it was either Paul, who had the same shirt on, or it was his nephew. I don't know what his nephew was wearing. But why wouldn't she?
Maybe the nephew wasn't a kid. Just because he's a nephew doesn't mean he's a kid.
Okay, I guess that's true. Yeah. Oh, God. I can't even stop thinking about that picture. I hate it. God. This story is just one twist and turn after the other. And then each one of those spins off, and like, it's just like Tori said, it's a rabbit hole. We could be here for days and days and days. I can't do that for my heart and soul. It's too much for me. It's too scary. So
this has already been too much for her.
Yeah.
So.
And that's how we get from a family that is brutally slain in their sleep to a demonic pig is watching us. There's a never-ending supply of articles and information out there about Amityville, and if you want to learn more about it, you can jump down the rabbit hole, because again, there are tons and tons and tons of things you can check out, and you can kind of see how it evolved into the multi-million-dollar franchise it has become.
Wowie, wow. I mean, there's just so much. So much. But if you enjoy a horror movie and you haven't seen the Conjuring movies, I would recommend them because they are pretty good. Except, again, for The Devil Made Me Do It, because that one is trash, in my opinion. Well, not even kind of scary. But
okay.
Torella would think that it was a scary... She's already shat herself.
Yeah, if you guys think that, like, oh, well, Torella could watch that one. But no, absolutely not. No.
I did once convince her to watch Sinister, and that was... I know, I really downplayed it. I was like, it's not even scary. It's not even bad. It's one of my prized memories. I'm so proud that I got you to watch it. Because it's the scariest movie I've ever seen.
I didn't sleep for like weeks.
I know, I'm so sorry, but also I'm not
and
sorry.
Andrew didn't either. Like, we watched it with all the lights on.
And Andrew's watching it like this through his fingers.
Yeah, like I turned and looked at him at one point and he was like... like he wasn't even looking.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Y'all shouldn't trust me.
No.
But... thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. We love you, and we will catch you on the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.